Welcome to Naperville Notables. I'm Liz Spencer. Today I'm talking with Ray Jones. He's the owner of Friedrich Jones Funeral Home and somebody I want you to meet. Ray, tell me a little bit about how you got involved. I mean, we all drive down Mill and we see this beautiful funeral home. How did this all come to be?
It came to be, first of all, I always wanted to be a funeral director. And since I've been a little boy, I remember doing a term paper in 6th grade. And the next day, the sister called me up to her desk and said, "This is very unusual that you want to be a funeral director. Everyone wants to be a policeman or a fireman or accountant." I said, "Sister, I just want to be that." I said, "I don't know if this occurred since my father died when I was in 1st grade. And I always remember attending his funeral, and we had a very large, supportive family. But through the years, then I would work at funeral homes, raking leaves, washing cars, all through grade school, all through high school. I thought it made it easy for myself because I knew what I wanted to be. Mm-hmm. And what I tried very hard was to focus on that. So after attending Joliet Junior College, and I got a degree in pre-mortuary. I went to Worsham College of Mortuary Science. At that time, it was on Jackson Boulevard. And we used to do all our embalming at the old county morgue. Wow. And that was quite a test. Mm-hmm. Many times people would stop at the coffee shop and you'd go across the street, and all of a sudden when you hit the bottom of the stairs, they'd receive the coffee. But after my apprenticeship, at that time it was a year, I served a 2-year apprenticeship, and that was at a funeral home in Joliet. Then we had to serve 1 year as a funeral director and 2 years as an embalmer. So after that was completed, I decided to work for local funeral homes. It was more like called a curbstoner. Mm-hmm. And then I decided, without having any family in the business, that I would go back to Lewis University to complete my business degree. While I was at Lewis University, I had a very good mentor that would come up here to Naperville and assist Mr. Frederick here at his funeral home. And he told me he's looking for an assistant, but probably an older gentleman, probably in his 40s, and I was a 24-year-old kid. And I came up here, I said, "Where is Naperville?" I think then maybe it was 10,000 people. And I came up to see him, and he did hire me. And then the snowstorm came.
And this is 1968, right?
Yep. And I got snowed in with them for like 4 days. And then I was still finishing up at Lewis and came to work for full time. So that's kind of how I came to Naperville.
And what do you think it was about that wanting to be a funeral director? What, at such a young age, what's the calling? Is it a calling for you?
Oh, I definitely think it's a calling. My friends tease me. I says it's also a community service. But I think you gotta, I love the business. I'm willing to see anyone any day of the week, any holiday, and you have to be, at least in mine, it's been in my blood and in my heart. That's why at my age, I'm still here every day of the week, unless I'm out of town. So, I think it's very important.
Right. Well, I think you bring up an interesting point that it is 24/7 because death isn't on a schedule.
Correct. It's not on a schedule. And sometimes it's very demanding because you have to drop everything because you want to give your devoted attention to the needs of a particular family that you're serving. And it's very important that you want to be a good listener.
Well, I think it's also not only a good listener, but there's got to be some comfort and some empathy because it's the toughest time in your life when you're faced with that situation.
Absolutely, and we see it every day because we're dealing with of all different faiths. Mm-hmm. We're dealing with all different ages of people here in this community. It's a very diverse community, especially being here in Naperville.
Well, and it's a bigger community now than it was in 1968 when it was 10,000. So.
Right, and very fortunately, I'm blessed that we were able to grow with it and to serve the different families in the community. But again, you still treat each one on an individual basis, and you want to be a good listener. To listen to what they would like, try to give them options or to select, and you're usually going to have a satisfied family.
Well, I think a lot of times too, people, unless they've been through it once or twice, the first time through is difficult, and that's where you have to come in to give them a lot of options and choices. I think today we don't know a lot about the funeral procedure. So let's talk about, if you don't mind, talk a little bit about it. People back in the day, they used to do two days of what I would call a wake, and then there was perhaps a church service,
right,
and perhaps at the cemetery, and so. And then nowadays it's come differently. Tell me, what's the purpose of a visitation or a wake? Why do we do that?
I think it's to give the people, their neighbors, their friends, their relatives, an opportunity to come and to give their sympathy to a family. It's better under that setting than just receiving somebody in the grocery store asking how Tom is, and they didn't know that Tom just passed away. So it's a proper setting, because that's how the funerals homes came in to be from the years and years ago, when the wake was at the home and people would come to the home to pay their respects. The funeral home took that place back then, because then they usually had air conditioning, so it made it a little more comfortable for people, and the setting was a little more comfortable.
Right. Well, because I think people are very much removed from death and dying now, that we're often, unfortunately family members are dying in a hospital or something, and so they're removed, so they're not part of that process, where back in the day when they were back in the parlor, they might have died at home.
Well, and back in that day, usually the family had their loved one at home, and they took care of the person. We didn't have the amount of nursing homes. We certainly didn't have hospice homes. So we also had different nationalities. It was very dear to them to take care of their loved one themselves.
So we've got the visitation, or the wake is the old term that I know, and so that's open to the public. Are often funerals open to the public, or what is a funeral, and how does that differ from a visitation?
Well, a visitation is normally the evening before, but a lot of times now, because of the age of the deceased or the connections in the community, we're having a visitation prior to a service. That's usually on a given day, possibly from 3 to 7, and then they conclude with a service, and then possibly they conclude with a celebration of that person's life with a luncheon or a dinner.
Right. Well, you said an interesting word there, celebration, because I think people have, a good friend of mine in the funeral industry often said it was a life, someone has died, but someone has lived. So it is more of a celebration. And that seems to be the trend more today, is to celebrate rather than look at it as a darker passing.
Correct. Today there's more memorialization. People want to, sometimes they want to have many easels available, because they want to do collages. They want to bring in memorabilia. The guy was an avid golfer. They want to bring in his golf bag or his putter. It's more of a memorialization. They want to do videos, DVDs. We're set up here for those all the time. We have a brand new music system. They want to bring in their own DVD, and like Kenny Rogers music during their visitation. They can be in one of the chapels and something different in the other. So it's all on a personalization.
Much more than it ever was before.
Oh, absolutely. I've been in the business and been in Naperville for 49 years, and every day is a new day. And it's interesting, but it's also challenging, because you have to learn to grow and to change. And the way you did something a year ago, you're not doing it the same today. So you have to be versatile, and in order to serve the needs of the people.
Right, and the needs of the people on average, and Naperville's a little bit larger community, 1 to 3% of the population passes away. So that 1 to 3% of the population has a possibility of coming here to have you help them. How do you deal with that? That this could be your friend in the community, because you're very community minded. How do you cope with all that?
Well, first of all, a lot of these people, you got to keep in mind, Liz, that I've had a relationship with for years.
Right.
So a lot of them are friends. A lot of them are like family. And it's very important when they call and they say, I'd like to talk to Ray, or I want to talk to Digger. You know, I only want Digger. And I don't mean that boasting or something, but it's because you've developed relationships with them. So you definitely want to be a part of it. I mean, I have phoned back for friends' funerals, you know, because I think it's important enough. If they think of you and they choose your funeral home, then they need you need that caring about them.
I would think that it would be, you know, that connection that you would want to, if I were a funeral director and at one time I did think about doing that as a profession, there was the desire.
You would have been good.
Well, thank you. I think it's the caring nature that this is a tough time and you want someone you trust
Right.
to take you to that last step.
Oh yeah, you know,
you
and we
need
get
that.
you know we get a lot of kidding. People, you know, people. That's why people a lot of times will pre-need their funeral because they're going to come in and do what they want to do, and also they talk about, you know, pricing in that today or funerals. You would never jeopardize your reputation to outprice something for people because they wouldn't forget it, because probably 62% families call you back because you served them well. And we also send out a survey on every family that we served, learning from the positives and learning from the negatives what you can do better or to make changes. And that's important.
It is. You know, there's the funeral side that we see here sitting in this, you know, lovely old building, which I like the fact that this is home-like. It sort of has that parlor feeling. But there's a whole backside to getting them here. How do you cope with that? Because you have to go pick up that loved one, and then there's a lot of medical and a lot of biomedical. That's got to be a little bit tough.
Well, when we receive a death call, either day or night, first of all, either myself, my daughter, or my son, we're on our phones 24 hours a day. We don't have any answering service. We don't have any voicemail. We normally will have 2 directors available. And when we always tell the family, when you're ready for us, please call us and we'll respond during the middle of the night within an hour and 15 minutes. Wow. And we normally we always try to come out well-groomed in a suit and a shirt and tie. And people are very surprised to see that. And then if they're available there, there's usually a hospice representative there. And then you try to set up an appointment when it's convenient for them. Now, if they've been up all night, maybe this afternoon at 3 o'clock. I mean, there's no rush. And when they're ready to come in, we'll ask them if they have available, like clothing or undergarments, if it's going to be a traditional, if their social security number, if the person was a veteran, okay? That way you'd have military papers, you know, a picture or a snapshot if they wish for the newspaper, or we put all our obituaries online on our web page. So, and then we sit down with them in a very quiet setting and try to help them and assist them in the arrangement process and getting back to a recovery stage.
It's very important. You told me, I think, a very nice story about obituaries and how you used to get them out the word, because it is wonderful to be able to go on a website and read, and then you're also not limited on space. Your website, you can have a long history or a short history. Newspaper, not so much.
Right.
But how did they used to post those obituaries? How did people find out? You
I'm
helped
sorry?
them. How did the obituaries get out beforehand? You used to help them out a little bit.
Yeah, well, we would first of all ask them if they wanted it in any particular newspaper, and most of them would use the Naperville papers. It depends on what area of Naperville or Aurora or Lisle they're coming from. But then the papers didn't come out as frequently. But now, I mean, I would say majority will use the Naperville Sun or the Daily Herald because it's a morning. But also a big thing is using our webpage. They do that, and that gets the word out. And they can also call the funeral home.
Right. And back in the day, you would have to go post that someplace.
Yeah. Well, back in those days, early days, I'm talking when Naperville was 10 to 12,000, I would go down to the Naperville Pharmacy. That would be on the corner of Jefferson and Washington. And a lot of the older Naperville residents would come there every morning for coffee. And then Marge Pearl would put it on the mirror. and then go across the street and put it on the glass door at the Naperville National Bank. And that would be one way of people knowing that someone passed away and what their arrangements were.
My, how we've changed.
How it's changed, that's right. That's right. And back then, a lot of the men in the community had nicknames. My predecessor was Charles Ben Frederick. I never heard anyone ever call him Charles, Ben. And that was just the way of life here in Naperville.
Right, and you have a nickname as well.
Well, I have a nickname as Digger.
Yes.
And I get it all the time. And being a funeral director, you get a lot of razzing by people. Mm-hmm. And I understand that. And I usually don't respond because I don't know before the end of that day or the following days, they may be calling me as a professional. Mm-hmm. So that's why I want to keep myself as a professional, but I'm also a human being, a guy that puts his slacks on the same as everybody else.
Right. Well, and I think we often kid and tease because it's an uncomfortable subject, so we don't know how to come across or how to ask a direct question about it. Now, so for you got into the funeral business as a young man here with Mr. Friedrich, and then you bought the business from him.
I bought it after he passed away.
Right. So tell me a little bit about that. That was a very gutsy thing.
Mr. Frederick died very suddenly from a heart attack, and I was 34 years old. And we had a very, I would say, a father-son relationship, though he wasn't my father. I had been with him for 10 years. He left a letter, and when he passed away, his wife, Kay, went to the desk drawer and opened up the letter. And if I could, he wanted me to have the first opportunity of buying the funeral home. And several people in the community, Ward Stearns from the bank, Phil Flynn, John Schrader, there's just a few of them that were very supportive. These are old timers that unfortunately have passed away, but they were very supportive. And Bank of Naperville then gave me a windshield appraisal. That's when they go by your place. And I really didn't have $10. And I was very fortunate that I had a cousin that was more like an uncle that owned a Budweiser franchise. And on Christmas Eve, he left the deposit with my mother. And he always told my mother I was the best loan he ever made. Because sometimes when you lend family members, they have a process of forgetting. So I was very fortunate at age 34 to acquire the funeral home. And then I operated it by myself for 5 years. And I just had a pager. And our big thing during the week, I had a wife and 3 kids, would go to the old Naperville Moose Lodge because the kids could slide on the tile floor. But many a night on the way there, my beeper would go off. And back then, the beepers was only through the phone company. But that's just the way of life was. I mean, it was 24 hours a day. But, I still spent and had good family time. But it was from the business to the family. And then that's basically what happened.
And now you've got some of your family joining you. Tell me a little bit about how that worked and how you feel about that.
Okay. I'm very fortunate. My son David went to the University of Iowa. He wasn't involved in the business at all. When he graduated, he came to me and he said, I think I want to go into mortuary science. And I said, fine. I said, you'll have to go to mortuary school, which he did. And I said, you'll have to start right from the bottom. And he did. He's probably runs the day-to-day operations. He's a licensed funeral director. He's brought a lot to the business. I think he's brought it to another level. My daughter was teaching accounting at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, and I went to her and her husband Jeff, and I would like to bring them back to the community to do pre-need. Because back then it was helter-skelter. We would set an appointment with you, then I would get a death call. So there was no continuity. And she came in and she's done the pre-need, she's done all our marketing, she does all our decorating, she's a CPA, she handles employee relations. She's run the Luminary program here in Naperville for the past 17 years, and she also runs the one in Plainfield. She also does a seed program in the spring that we send seeds to all the families that we've served for they can plant or remember their loved one that way. So those two they're a very good combination. And also, I must say, we have a staff of 8 licensed funeral directors. We have 2 ladies that I'm very proud of. They're very professional, and they all make a difference in serving the families of both Naperville and Plainfield.
Today it's very, it's not as uncommon to have women in the funeral industry, but back in the day it used to be uncommon to have a woman.
Back when I was in mortuary school, we maybe had 2 or 3, and the only ones they were there to get a license, it was called, because their fathers had the business. But a lot of them never employed. But I understand today from the younger people that are staffed here with us that over 50% are the women. And there's definitely a place for them in this industry.
I think it's, again, much along your own call, it's the comfort, it's the nurturing, it's the bringing people through that tough time.
And ladies are good because when people come in with clothing or makeup, they can relate. You know, something that I can't relate as well, and I'm the first to admit it. So they, you know, of a blush or lips tones, and they're very good. And, you know, the jewelry and the women feel very comfortable dealing with another lady, and that's very positive.
You mentioned that you have 2 programs, the Luminaries and the Seeds, and that's all about the idea of grief and that. So let's talk a little bit about that. The funeral home, you know, it happens. You have a death. We meet you. You take good care of us, and then there's this process afterwards. Now that person is gone. Now the excitement, the chaos of all that time, which kind of boosts you up a little bit, and then there's not only it's not your loved one, but then there's not anything. How does these programs help fill that gap, and how do you help?
First of all, we have an annual luminary, and it's the families from September to September of a given year that we serve. Every one of them receives a letter. We also publish all their names in the newspaper with their permission. Then we have a bag made for each one, and they start this process here in June, doing these, because it's a very big program. And then they're in the letter, they'll know what the date of our luminary, when they're welcome to come here to decorate their bag or to bring any memorabilia in. And it's a very low-key evening. People will come around 4 o'clock. The building is open. The bags are put outside. The luminary lights are lit for them, or they can light them themselves. It's very low-key though. And usually at 6 o'clock, we will invite a clergyman or a deacon from different churches in the community to do a service. And it's just been a very outreaching thing in the community. People that have had deaths 3 or 4 or 5 years ago will call us and they'll want a luminary bag put out. And that's fine. And they're welcome to take that bag with them to tie that into their Thanksgiving or Christmas rituals.
And why is that important? Why is the grief process important?
I think it's important because they need closure, and they need to go through that. And whatever you can do to help them or give them options or opportunities, that's important to the consumer.
Well, I think it's interesting that you have the Luminary program in the fall, and then you send them seeds, which is sort of in the spring, which I think ties in well.
Ties in with life and growth, and to revive. And everyone will receive that in the mail, and then they're welcome to do as they wish, how they want to plant that seed to see that life still going on.
Right. So, Ray, tell me a little bit about your community service, because I think you have a great community service as a funeral director, but you also give of yourself in so many organizations. I'm not even going to try to go for it.
Well, I believe that you have to be involved in the community. I probably have served on maybe 10 or 12 boards. We were the first ones, and I believe in reaching out to the youth in the community, to the seniors, to the elderly. And we've done that with youth just by example. We were the first sponsor of the YBA basketball program. I think we did it for 5 years. We've sponsored a Little League team.
Your team won a couple of years
and
ago.
I was very glad to hear that, because that manager was on the bubble.
On the bubble.
On the bubble, yeah. And we sponsor the mayor's YMCA prayer breakfast in December. We've done, we try to reach out to different organizations in the community. I've started the first St. Peter and Paul event. It was 17 years, and this will be the 18th year that we run for the church. And a lot of times the money will go to different agencies. Last year, all the money went to Naperville Responds. It went to Waterleaf, and I'm running a blank on St. Vincent de Paul. Okay. But and then I've also I've been involved with starting the St. Pat's Gala, and that's an annual event. So I enjoy it. I think that if you're going to be in business in the community, you have to be involved in the community and give of yourselves. I've also served as on the commission of the Police and Fire Board for 8 years. So I like the government services. I enjoy watching the council meetings just to keep abreast of what's going on, in the community.
It's amazing the viewership they have.
They do.
They do. People want
And
to
I
know.
always like the public forum. Then some of the other things, I can come and go with.
Right. And I think it's a nice way with the community to get to know you too, because again, it is an industry, it is a thing that has a mystery to it. And so it's nice to be able to put a kind face with what we think is not necessarily a positive time in life. There was maybe 10 years ago a drive to have funeral homes become more corporate, and you stayed family, where a lot of funeral homes didn't. They went in. And so what made you stay family and stay local?
Well, first of all, Liz, I'm doing what I love. I've always wanted to be a funeral director, so why would I give that up to a corporation to buy me out and give me the day-to-day details of what I have to do? And also, both of my kids came into the business, and they're going to be the ones for tomorrow of this industry. I have an outstanding staff that work at both of our locations. And some of these people have been with me for 30 or 35 years, and I enjoy this business. I don't know what I would do if I didn't come to this building every day of the year. I come every day of the year. I don't know the time of day always, but I'm usually here at 7 in the morning. I leave about 3, but I come back when the wintertime to check the heat and so forth. So, and first, I believe in, this is something I've always wanted. So why would I want to give it up? Right. The corporate funeral homes, and this is my opinion, they haven't done as well in our industry. Right. First of all, you're not seeing the same person. Their loved ones are taking maybe 30 miles away to be prepared and brought back. All our work is done in-house, and it's all done by our staff. They're all licensed funeral directors and embalmers, and that's important.
It is. Well, and I think it is. I think it was an interesting, trend, but I think, more and more people are just keeping it local, which I think is a nice thing. When you think about the future for this business and your family, Ray or Dave and Stephanie taking it forward, what do you see changing coming forward in the funeral services? Do you think it's come a long way? Where else are we going with this?
I think there's going to possibly be less traditional, more memorialization, more celebrations. I think you're going to have to be multi-purpose to serving families. That's kind of where I see it. I'm not sure if that's the gold and silver bowl, but I think they have that attitude of offering more services and more products that are going to be available to people.
Right, well, and I would agree. I mean, I see more and more people when you go to a wake or a visitation, very personalized. They've brought everything in,
right.
And, coffee service,
right.
And also the thing that strikes me is the casual dress. I was always taught I'm wearing my funeral suit today for you because this is how I was taught to be presented. But now it's different.
Yes, it is different. But I mean, there's probably a line there, a fine line. Only time we get involved is if we have families and they maybe have young kids. I'm talking teenagers, right. And they want to maybe be pallbearers, that they don't need to run out and buy them a suit, because that could be a hardship, But other than that, I mean, I think we're one of the few guys, at least my friends say, I'm one of the few guys that still are wearing a suit and tie. Most of them say, hey Digger, I put my suit away, I'm saving it for you. Because most of them are retired. And we're one of the few industries that still wear the suit and the dress code. In fact, it's kind of nice around here periodically when we don't have any visitations that I can come in a shirt and slacks, because it's not something that I'm used to doing. But it all depends on the individuals, on dress and that, and the church service, if it's a church service or in the funeral home.
I think people, and I think, because you've talked a lot about choice and options and what you give people, I think people don't think about that they don't think, well, I'm going to have a choice of how this is going to happen, what's going to happen next.
Well, one way with people having that choice is by doing what's called a pre-need.
Right.
And that's what Stephanie does, and she's doing more and more of them, where people can come in and express their wishes. We can complete a folder. They can write their own obituary. And it makes it easier, especially if they have children, because someone will say, this is what I want. If they want cremation, we'll even have them sign the cremation authorization, because sometimes the kids may not agree with it, and you're going to honor what that person's desires are.
Do you think, with pre-need picking up, do you think people are more open to talking about what they might want? Or is it, or
well,
not?
Well, we don't solicit pre-need. Pre-need is available by people calling us. We don't do any cold calling. We don't do any mailing. Yes, we do advertise it. It's available and the options that are available, but it's up to the consumer to decide that.
True, but just in general, do you think population is more open about talking about death and dying now and what they might want?
Oh, I think so, definitely. Because I think today the medical profession, your hospices, I think they're giving people more information of what could be taking place down the road when someone is critically ill or been diagnosed with a condition.
Well, and I think with today's television shows too, because there's been a couple that have focused on funeral industry and
with what, I'm sorry?
They have focused on the funeral industry. There's been some television, Six
Right.
Feet Under, and that.
Right.
So I think we've got a little bit better idea, and so that people might actually think a little bit about what my funeral might look like,
Right.
and have and that be okay, not look like, well, are you thinking of taking your own life? When you used to think about funeral services, people were often worried that you were, on the edge.
Right.
So with thinking about that, do people often wonder what you want? Do you know what you want?
I certainly have plenty of opportunity to think about it.
Yes.
And I certainly I have a file. In fact, I have my pallbearers picked out. Most of them are golfing buddies, and I certainly will have a traditional visitation, and I would want a mass of Christian burial. There's certain priests that I would like to have celebrate, and then I would like to have a celebration afterwards.
Wow. Well, it's a good thing that, being who you are, that you think about all that. So.
Well, I think you have to. I think that's just a normal phase of life as we're getting older, and it's just a reality.
Right. Well, and I think, as you said, I think it does help take the burden off children. I know my folks are like, well, do whatever you want. I'm like, well, I'd like to know what you'd like. Yeah.
That's right.
And because it's going to be a tough time for me, I don't need to make those decisions.
Well, unfortunately, this morning, we had a gentleman passed away at home, and his sons are all out of state. Right. But fortunately, they had contacted us a week ago and kind of gave us preliminary information that we may go forth until they get back here to Naperville. So it just kind of makes it easier. It
does. Well, Ray, thanks for taking time and talking to me a little bit about what you do and your big role here in the community. I know that it's been just a real comfort to know that you are here.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it, and thank you for taking the time of coming in for this interview.
Not at all.
All right, very good.